So, whilst we can certainly improve the styling, I first of all want to improve the behavior of the buttons. Right now, they're not doing anything when we press them. That happens because we haven't wired them up to anything. Now, onPressed here takes a function. That's important. The value of onPressed is a function that returns void. This is what this here means. Now, previously, for example, on title here, we saw that title wanted a widget. If we hover over onPressed, we see this strange thing, and that simply means a function that takes no arguments and doesn't return anything but a function. This here is basically the type definition for a function. Arguments and return value. So onPressed takes a function. Now we got a couple of different options here. We can add a new function outside of the class. That's a bad idea. Your objects, so your classes, should always work standalone. So everything that belongs to a widget should go into the same class. All the data a widget uses and so on should belong into the same class so that the widget is a standalone unit. So we can add a function here into our class. You can do that because you can add functions to classes. They are then called methods, but it's a normal function. So here we want a function that takes no arguments and does not return anything. So here in my app, we can add void and then any name you want, like answer question. Answer question. Typically, your function names are descriptions of what happened or what happens. So here we got our answer question function. It does not take any arguments. It returns nothing. And in there, let's simply print answer chosen. Now that's the function defined here. How do we now wire this up to onPressed? Well, it's simple, right? We call answer question here, like this. Add parentheses and we're good. Well, we already see that we get an error here. The expression here has a type of void and therefore cannot be used. Does that make sense? Shouldn't it return void? Isn't that what I just said? The problem here is, and that is now something which I know that it can be confusing, but it's super important to understand. So I'll explain this in very clear and slow steps. The problem is that here I'm executing answer question. Sounds all right, right? I want to execute it when onPressed is clicked. However, you have to remember that Dart parses your file from top to bottom, left and right, when it, in the end, starts your application. Now there, it then runs the app, builds the MyApp widget, and that means the build method gets called. And in the build method, Dart now goes through the entire method to find out what to build. And it sees, okay, I build a material app, and there I have a scaffold, app bar, text, column, and so on. Dart goes through all of that. With the help of Flutter, it's able to bring that onto the screen. But then it encounters the raised button. The raised button is configured to have a child, which is this text. And then for onPressed, what you're saying to Dart with this syntax is onPressed, the value for onPressed should be what answer question returns. Let's have a look at Dartpad again. There, earlier, what I did is I add numbers, and then down here, I store the result of add numbers in first result, right? What add numbers returns. And I do this by executing add numbers. This then executes this code and returns that value, and therefore I can store that returned value here in first result. And here it's the same. By adding parentheses, this gets executed as soon as Dart encounters this. Not when the user presses the button, but when Dart goes over that code to set up the raised button. So it executes answer question, and now it expects to get back the value which should be passed to the raised button as a value for onPressed. But onPressed wants a function. Answer question, on the other hand, doesn't return anything, because this is a function that doesn't return anything, and since we now pass the returned value to onPressed, we return nothing to onPressed, but onPressed wants a function. So we're not passing this function here to onPressed, but the return value of this function, because by adding parentheses, this gets executed when Dart tries to build that button. Of course, this is not what we want. We want to execute answer question when the user presses the button. That's why we want to pass a pointer at answer question to onPressed. Now, consider this real-life example. If you have a TV and you can turn the TV on with your remote by pressing a button on your remote, then you could say turning the TV on, that's what happens in a function. That function could be named turn on, and you execute that function by pressing the button on your remote. Now, if I give you the remote for the TV, you can press that button whenever you want, and that turns on the TV. It would be bad if I pass you the remote and simultaneously I press the button for you, because then I would take the option of turning the TV on away from you. That's what we're doing here. We're essentially executing the function at the point of time we want to give it to Flutter. So the solution for all of that is that we remove the parentheses here. By doing that, we're passing a pointer at that function to Flutter, to onPressed. We're telling onPressed, hey, this is the name of the function which you should execute when the user presses the button. So we're passing the name of the function to onPressed and to the raised button, and not the result of the function. Name instead of result. Super important. So here we have to use answer passed question without parentheses, and you always need to use it without parentheses when you just want to give the name of the function to some argument or whatever it is in your code. And we'll see this occur over and over throughout the course. So here we can do the same for answer question down there on the second raised button, and of course also on the third raised button, always without parentheses, to just point at the function instead of executing it. With that, if we go back, now the button is enabled, it's not dark grayish anymore, and we can press it, and I pressed each button now, and therefore here in our debug console we now see answer chosen, answer chosen, answer chosen, and that's coming from that print statement here, which simply is a system output, which we don't see in the app, but we can use it during development to see some log here in our debug console. Of course, this is not a feature you would use in a real app because the user doesn't see it, but for developing an app, it's super useful. So our buttons work and we execute this function when we press them.